My name is Amanda Knitter, and I'm the Director of Patient Advocacy with Global Genes. And I have the honor and the privilege of welcoming you all to the 5th Annual Rare Patient Advocacy Summit. You know what? I think I'm going to go rogue for a second and take a little playbook from Ellen DeGeneres and do a selfie. Sorry for going rogue, just deal with it for a second. The one reason I want to do this is that cool wall on each side. That's our social wall. So when you hashtag 2016 GG Summit, it'll start to show up on these screens. So please be social with us. We have a filter for Snapchat as well. So if you know all those fun things, I'm looking at the teens back there, please do so. Okay, so I'm not going to get everyone in there, but we'll try our best. Everyone, hi! Hi! Okay. Do you want to? I'm not going to try to tweet live time for you guys, but she will tweet for me. That's Emily. Emily, say hi. She's our social media guru as well, so feel free to grab her if you have any questions. Okay, back to the script. I'm sure Nicole is over there like, oh no, rogue, what does that mean? So again, this is truly a special time for the rare community and our Global Genes family. Yesterday, it was really interesting to see our Facebook page and our Foundation Alliance Facebook group kind of blowing up with everyone saying, so excited to see you. We just landed in LAX or just landed in John Wayne or on our way. It truly is a testament to what this community does when they come together. It does feel like a family reunion every year, and I want to welcome you with open arms and come talk to us, find us. The GG family is here for you. We have nearly 600 people registered for the event today. That is astronomically high for us, and we're just overwhelmed with the amount of people that are coming from all over the country, internationally, to join us today. It represents almost 200 different rare disease communities, so we're getting one step closer each year. I think last year was about 120 rare diseases in the room, so every year we grow our family just a little bit more, and this is not counting the many, many people that will be joining us via live stream through Platform Q. So in each of your sessions and the main ballroom, you can join if you are not able to attend in person and get the same content, access to the same presenters and speakers, and we're really thankful to be able to do that each year. So not only is it just this main ballroom, but each of the breakouts as well. This event every year brings together patient and parent advocates, industry experts, and medical professionals that really are invested in the rare community and trying to figure out how to become the change agents that are necessary to really drive better outcomes for the families that are affected by rare disease. This year's summit, we decided to have a theme that really encompassed what we hoped you guys gain out of these next 2 days. Learn, connect, inspire is what the theme is this year. We feel like we drafted an agenda and created an experience that will really allow you to do just that. We want you to leave here after these 2 days that I promise you will be overwhelming. Every year it is for us as well as you, because you learn something new every day and every conversation you have in between networkings, not even just in the breakouts. So I see people standing in the back. Don't be shy. We already warned people that they're coming in and register, filter in. So we want you to leave here with the tools and the connections that you need to go back and inspire that change, to inspire change within your rare community, within your support network, or just the general public, those elevator conversations that you have every day when you leave and you have your new t-shirt that you just all got with Hope It's in My Genes. It sparks conversation, and now you will be empowered by just being in this room today. So squeeze as much as you can out of this next 2 days, and please come connect with us. You know, before we kick off with our great plenary speaker, I need to go over the housekeeping business, I guess. So I first want to introduce you to our Global Genes team. We'll be getting a slide in just a second. Okay, here it is. So I am one of 15 women that are both in the room today, and then Alana is probably listening live stream from Florida. So please come connect with us. I don't know, and I can't see any of your faces, but I'm sure that they're sitting next to you or sprinkled throughout the event. We'll be stationed at the registration table as well as in a lot of the breakouts. I don't have my name tag on, but under our names, we have flags that say Global Genes team members. So hopefully you can find us, come say hi. Again, you're a part of the family now, so anything we can do to help you, please come find us. Next, your handy dandy notebook. Anyone remember Blue's Clues? No? The first page is a really great map of the venue. You'll see here the tracks, the how-tos, and where the plenary, you obviously made it to the Huntington Ballroom, the main ballroom, so we're happy for that. The first breakouts, so there's track 1, 2, 3, and 4. Track 2 will stay right in this room. So if you love drug development, do not leave this room. Down the hall, so if you go out where you had breakfast and keep going, you'll see a big sign that says breakouts. Tracks 1, 3, and 4 will be there. All good signage, but if you get lost, I'm sure someone else is probably lost with you, you'll find your way and we'll be there to help. Then the how-tos. So these are your more hands-on sessions, small, more intimate, low tech, no AV, just conversations and really tactful activities and strategies. Will be out the back doors here in Fountain West and East. I think that is it for the, restrooms. Restrooms, on your way to the breakouts, that's where you'll find them. So there's a little table where you picked up your t-shirts right past that. For those of you that are joining us for the Tribute to Champions of Hope event on Saturday, we have, again this year, partnered up with Dave Beauty and Beauty Bus to provide some free glam services for all those that are attending. It is first come, first served basis. They will be here tomorrow from 9 to 5, so please sign up outside and they'll be able to get you filled out. Okay, last but not least, I would love to extend a generous thank you to our sponsors. Providing 2 days of educational sessions, special events, and delicious meals for low to no cost is really not possible without these sponsors. We had over $100,000 in patient scholarship stipend requests this year, and they came to our rescue again, and we were able to offer about 115 scholarships, which again blows all the past numbers out of the water, and we thank you for allowing us to do that. This morning's breakfast was sponsored by Teva Pharmaceuticals, so if you're all eating some pastries and fruit, thank Teva for that. All of the breaks will be in the same location on the Huntington Terrace where you had it this morning. PRA Health Sciences, Shire, Alexion, Walgreens, and Genentech are platinum sponsors. And they have some cool activities planned. PRA Health Sciences, their booths outside there, are planning to do a wall of hope. And you'll see in some certain areas postcards with Sharpies where we want you to fill out what it means to be here, what rare disease means to you, and what you hope for the future. Be very candid with your answers, and we're going to put them up and make a hope wall. So I can't wait to see what that looks like at the end of these inspiring 2 days. Okay, now without further ado, it is my honor to introduce the 2016 Rare Patient Advocacy Summit's keynote speaker, Dr. Robert Ring. He's the former Chief Science Officer of Autism Speaks. Rare disease, he will provide us with compelling thoughts and insights and comparisons from the early days of autism and the present day of rare disease. His unique perspective will set the tone for this year's conference, addressing the evolving ecosystem of rare disease and help lay out the plan and path forward for rare disease patients as we look to what's next. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Ring.
So good morning, everyone, and hello to everyone online, wherever you are around the world, having this streamed to you. I just wanted to start off quickly by thanking everyone at Global Genes for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. It's both a great honor and a wonderful opportunity to try to help share some of my own experiences working along this value chain of science that we're going to talk about. So for the purposes of, I don't know if this is going to, for the purpose of the talk today, I really want to try to take you up in altitude to see how this all works, how this whole scientific process works, and how foundations ultimately are in a unique position to really influence and help move things forward. I'm going to start off with a few organizing principles, if you will, some terms and concepts that we all really need to understand, whether or not you're a patient dealing with a new diagnosis, a parent of that patient, you're in a foundation, you're a bench scientist, you're a pharma exec. Doesn't matter where you work in this stakeholder landscape, the concepts that I'm hoping to impart to you, I think are really fundamental to understanding how this all works. We're going to go over those. We're going to talk about a few real unifying challenges we face with heterogeneity across the disease landscape. I want to highlight a few game changers out there that everybody needs to know about and will probably be the featured part of discussions throughout the meeting. And along the way, take it or leave it, I'm going to offer some advice, if you will, to those who are just getting underway in this journey of activation, being activated by a diagnosis and really wanting to make a difference. I've spent years working with parents around the world, and it doesn't matter if we're in Tanzania or we're in the United States, all these great stories begin with a mom or a dad, to be honest. So just to start off, there's a bio, I'm sure. I just want to emphasize the point. I'm going to try to leverage a very unique set of experiences I've had. I've worked along this value chain of science as a researcher in academia. I've been a drug hunter in industry. I've been the chief science officer of foundation, venture philanthropy. I've really worn many hats, and wherever possible, I'm going to try to leverage those backgrounds to help build some concepts for you. Let's just start with the basics, and let's just agree, I hope we can all agree that fundamentally what we all have in common here is this sense of passion and urgency in trying to turn science into things. What I mean by that is we all share this desire to take the breakthroughs in science and innovations in technology that are happening in research centers around the world and tech companies around the world and turn these into products. Really reduce these to practice. It could be medicines, it could be diagnostic tests, assistive technologies, it could be clinical guidelines. There's an endless array of things that science can be turned into to improve outcomes for families out there. And it's really that improvement in outcomes that represents the end game for the science. And if we rethink this fundamental translational research continuum, it's just really three basic things. You have to create knowledge, you have to reduce that knowledge to practice, and then you ultimately have to ensure that the products of that reduction are disseminated, are accessible, are affordable, and get to the right patients when they need it. But in reality, this fundamental value chain of science, if you will, is a little more complicated than that. If I was to map that on top of the canonical drug development pathway that many of you are familiar with, and if you've not seen that before, it's shown above. This value chain, this translational research continuum, proceeds normally in an orderly progression, sequential progression of steps that take those early ideas and continue to build value into them by adding new information. Ultimately, at least in the context of medical products development, this is regulated by authorities like the FDA to ultimately make it to the market. So if there's one thing if you could walk away today knowing one thing, it's really understanding how this value chain works, what the partners are involved, where the sources of money come from, and ultimately how progress and success is measured. Because as a parent or as a foundation, as a company, have to own that. You have to understand how this works if you're going to make decisions on how to mobilize your time, your resources, and all of the energy that you're channeling from the patient community into that. And this partner ecosystem is complex. It starts early in that chain with basic research that happens in universities and at NIH and other government research organizations, these engines of knowledge creation. They also occur in clinical trials. Entrepreneurs and small companies take those ideas and move them forward, the most promising ones, through the next stages of the translational research continuum. Ultimately, it involves patients who are enrolled in trials or who are the recipients of those products once they reach market. And there's the FDA and other regulatory authorities that set the ground rules and referee the process. And there are companies that have to manufacture things and build things. Journals that have to publish and make this information available to you. The point here is this is a complicated process. Not one entity carries the ball from the original idea to the end game. And knowing what this partner landscape looks like for you in your disease area is important. It's not the same for everyone. Build your stakeholder map early, who you need to be engaged with in order to help move things along that change. Be fearless and appreciate that languages matter. Interacting with companies, interacting with FDA, interacting with payers, all of these stakeholders frequently are caught up in their own language and vernacular, and you're not expected to know that inherently, but working with the right partners, reaching out and asking for help to translate, if you will, is incredibly important. Money, resources that make this work come from different places too. If we look at basic research, knowledge creation in universities, these are all funded mostly through grants coming from NIH, from taxpayers essentially. As you progress these knowledge down the chain, angel investors, philanthropists oftentimes get involved, and venture capitalists move in once really good ideas appear, and sometimes even increasingly more pharma has their own innovation engines that are supplying resources to researchers and their funds and investment banks that own the pharmaceutical companies in reality, IPOs. But this is really important to understand that there's not one source of money driving this process. And as a foundation, you certainly can't shoulder the costs of moving knowledge forward through this chain every step of the way. But you can be active in selective ways. You can be creative in how you mobilize your resources. At Autism Speaks, where I was a chief science officer for many years after leaving Pfizer and joining them, we launched a venture arm of the foundation, explicitly to help us get beyond just providing grants to academic researchers, to help us stand up entrepreneurs and small companies with really compelling ideas. Foundations can do many creative things to mobilize very limited resources. And so it's very important to be thinking about that. and think beyond the sort of orthodoxy of grant giving that has oftentimes defined foundation and philanthropy in the past. Don't be afraid to experiment with models. Study how others have done this in the past. Regardless of what you do, measuring progress and being able to communicate to patients, to families, to your investors, whoever your sponsors are, is incredibly important. It's critical that you own being able to articulate where are we in this process? How close are we to bringing something to patients, to the end game? So there are a variety of ways that you can measure progress, and the reason I bring this up is because these measures of progress ultimately become the value system of those partners working in that area. It becomes how they're incentivized to do work, how their careers are advanced. And understanding that allows you to build relationships and use them, align them, coordinate them against the needs of your community. There are sort of basic stage gates that make up the transition from phases in this canonical drug development pathway shown here. You can just measure the number of INDs filed, the number of proof of concepts achieved, the number of new molecules that have reached market. These are sort of crude ways of measuring the progress. And trust me, if you're developing medical foods or a behavioral intervention or an assistive technology, it's not going to follow that path. So you have to understand what is making it work. For academics, could be publications are the primary way of measuring their output, their success. But I'm sure as the parents in this room will all agree, there's no stack of Nature papers high enough to equal what a product on the market, a medicine that actually addresses a real symptom for you equals. So, but if you're trying to mobilize researchers in the basic research area in the clinic, you have to understand what motivates them. If you're obviously interested in other things that drive research in the basic area, but if you're an entrepreneur or a small company, it's not necessarily going to be publications, it's going to be intellectual property. Have you taken that idea and built protection around it so that any investment in it to commercialize it will be protected? Those become measures in the next stage of the value chain. It could be the number of molecules at interclinical development. It could be biomarkers that help de-risk them. It could, any number of measures can be used. But understanding what these are is critical to understanding how the partners you are going to depend on to help move your story forward think. The end game, of course, payers and patients who are also an incredibly important place where progress is measured. And again, in the context of rare disease community, getting that orphan designation early and being able to benefit from all the incentives that come with legislation that define this space is also critical. Already emphasized the need to own this, to understand this. Don't be afraid to collaborate, to share resources across and best practice on how to do this. But I want to cut away and behind the partner landscape, behind the money, behind the measures of progress, and really tell you what this value chain is all about. I'm showing, it's disappeared, and showing you this classic cartoon, different iterations of this I'm sure you've seen in a variety of places. This gap, this translational valley of death that people oftentimes talk about where really good ideas come to die and aren't being moved into the clinic. It's a reality, but why is that? Just think about the partners, where the money comes from, because really what this value chain is all about is driving down risk. What I mean by risk, at the earliest parts of the value chain, that first publication, you found the gene, so what? It's important, but it's a long ways away from actually becoming something. A drug, a treatment, a cure, even a diagnostic test. So the probability that that idea is going to make it all the way is quite high early in this value chain. And really all the research that's being done, every experiment run, every decision made, really in some way or another is about building knowledge that reduces the risk, increases the confidence that that idea can go all the way. And the progressive movement of this activity helps to just collectively push down that risk. But that costs money. Costs a lot of money. And as you move down the value chain, the experiments required to generate that knowledge, to de-risk that idea, get bigger. The checks get bigger. And that's why, when you remember the partner landscape, why there's certain partners working in that part of the value chain. Pharma, investment banks making decisions about phase 3 trials really are the only ones who can afford to write checks for hundreds of millions of dollars. But you can build a lot of value into the process early on, and it's just, the point here is recognizing that that inflection point between risk and reward maps about where that valley of death lies. And so as the markets, as the field moves around, every space is different, the perception of risk changes, and the willingness to take risk and invest changes with that. I also want to point out that this takes time. You can hear all sorts of studies that tell you the average time it takes to develop a drug being 8 to 10 years, most likely longer. But the reality I want to emphasize here, it does take time, and that matters. Why? Because once you really have your idea, maybe it's a chemical structure that you think is going to be your clinical candidate, you're going to test in patients in clinical trials years later, that's the time you need to lock up the patent on that. Otherwise, someone can come in and scoop it. But that starts a clock for companies. You get 20 years usually of exclusivity. Generic companies are going to start attacking you even before that. You may get 17, 18 years of exclusivity. You burn most of your exclusivity, patent protection, in the process of getting your idea to market. And so you may only have just a couple of years to recoup the cost of all of that work and all of the failures that don't account for not getting there. It's very important to understand that. But really, as you interact with stakeholders along this value chain, everybody's thinking about risk. Probability of success. How much is it going to cost to buy an increase in confidence? We do it through different ways. It's like the value chain of creating the diamonds that are on your wedding rings and earrings. Starts with just mining a big pile of dirt, hoping to find, a rough stone that I wouldn't be able to tell a diamond from a rock, to be honest. And each sequential step, each cut in that stone, each handoff builds value into an otherwise worthless piece of dirt. Now that I hope, and look, I'm going to be here all week. I am happy to talk to you guys at any point in time. I'm not sure we're going to have a lot of time for questions, but this may come fast, this may come furious. Don't be afraid to reach out and talk to me or others here that know this value chain really well if you have questions. But do ask them, because that construct of the value chain is critical. And each of you have to understand how that value chain is different for you, your disease community, your story. Let's move on to another really important, what I would call organizing principle. And it's really about the end game, clinical targets, as we would call it in industry. Wearing that industry cap, we would usually begin any endeavor by envisioning a product on the market, a label on a drug, if we could have it. If I turn to any one of you today in your own rare disease story. If I could give you one product today, a medicine, a vaccine, a diagnostic kit for early detection that will create the most impact, most value for the most individuals in common with your story, what would that be? How clearly have you defined what it is you want science to do for you? Companies will start with that target product concept, that profile. We need a modifier, and let's say for autism, I'm going to use autism as an example because it's very familiar to me. In the autism world, it might be that core dyad of symptoms that the DSM-5 currently says are the cardinal features of autism. The social deficits and the repetitive behaviors and narrow restricted interests. Many of you have autism comorbidity, part of your rare disease story. But trust me, autism is a lot more complicated than this. And if I chose the cardinal features of other diseases, maybe it's hyperphagia for Prader-Willi, it's a lot more complicated than that. And in reality, we know that autism, beyond these core features, have a whole constellation of associated comorbid psychiatric and neurological features to them that are not unique to autism, but in many ways will define the clinical journey and probability of outcomes for individuals who have autism. And beyond those, there are even somatic issues that may not be part of the etiology of autism, but are certainly arguing for autism as a whole body disorder if you think about treatment. Autism is a lot more complicated too if you think about the gender differences and the severity of these and prevalence of these different symptoms, etc. You know, autism really is made up of hundreds of smaller rare diseases, genetic syndromes. Some of them are shown here. It's very, very heterogeneous, and we'll talk about that in a moment. My point here is, let me go back. My point here is, what does this look like for your rare disease? Because as you engage partners in the research community, as you engage partners further down the line in the investment world and in pharmaceutical companies, people are required to move that science forward. They're going to want to see organization and coordination against something very specific, not something very amorphous. And trust me, FDA will require clarifying regulatory paths to deliver. And any one of these targets here, any one of these symptom domains could be a bona fide target for treatment development. In fact, drug companies have spent years prosecuting anxiety and sleep and mood disorders and attention to develop medicines for that, and they could very well be moved into this space or into your space if that's part of your clinical concept, your construct. But beyond the clinical targets, the things we want medicines or science to move on, the real end game we know is not that. This is the real end game. Parents, patients want quality of life. And that's going to be measured differently in every rare disease story. Some families are just fighting for lifespan. Some are fighting for the complications of social deficits and having friends and being employed and wondering where your child is going to live after they age out of services. These are the outcomes. And although these aren't as centrally figured in how FDA and other regulatory authorities approve medicines and products, they are becoming more and more part of that integrated perspective. Just take-home thoughts. I've already mentioned this. Own this, define this for yourself. Really, if you are going to make an early bet as a young foundation, and you're going to get this guidance all the time from FDA and from others, know what this is. Natural history studies are incredibly important, helping you understand what your rare disease really looks like over time. And it's a strategic investment in the future payoff of that story. Much more valuable in many ways than some of the grants we oftentimes think about. All right, targeting these symptoms. Okay, say you have the construct, you know what it is, you know exactly what you'd like to do. How are you going to do it? What science are you going to leverage against that symptom to bring out benefits? I want to do, in the next couple of slides, just open your eyes to a world beyond medicines. Yes, medicines are important, but we'll get into there are other modalities that are in play. And as you think across these other modalities, there are things that are in common and things that are different between them that are important to understand. Regardless of whether or not you're talking about an assistive technology, a therapeutic game, or a injectable medicine, a biologic, the need for evidence is paramount. We all have to really push towards evidence-based therapies. And how you measure outcome in clinical trials should be fairly agnostic to what the modality is. And outcome measures continue to plague the stories of many rare disease communities. But the future is that likely none of these are going to stand alone. They're going to be used in combination. But there are differences in potency and their ceiling effect. There's differences in trial design. There's certainly differences in the timelines associated with bringing them forward, the costs, differences in regulatory paths, et cetera. All very important to understand. So medicines, featuring some of the sort of well-known, very pricey ones in the orphan rare disease space, our approach, small molecules and biologics, continue to be really at the forefront of turning science into things for families, and they will continue to be. But there are other things. Certainly in autism and many disorders of the brain development, we're going to be great benefit through behavioral interventions. And we're not just talking about ABA and things that target some of those symptoms. It could be occupational speech therapy, you name it. These create value for families. And the same process of translation is used to help develop them. Medical foods, also a very interesting area. These are not nutritional supplements you buy at GNC. There is actually regulatory oversight for the development of specifically produced therapeutic nutrition that can be used and labeled against a specific disease. They're referred to as medical foods. There are already examples of this entering the rare disease space. They're also they're used in the very large disorders like Alzheimer's. But this is an incredibly interesting area of work. And certainly for those of you whose rare disease story involves mutations, inborn errors in metabolism, these are already part of your story. Technology, this is the area I think everybody should be watching right now. This is, for me, among the most promising new areas that are bringing unlikely partners together. Partners from the gaming community with cognitive neuroscientists, for instance. There are therapeutic games being developed that, not unlike exercise where you isolate a certain muscle group that's been injured through a specific exercise, we can develop tasks that can be gamified to isolate circuits in the brain and help to compensate for deficits in function that may be brought on by a disease. One of the first investments our venture arm at Autism Speaks made was in a company called Achille Labs that was developing a therapeutic game for ADHD. And they were going to take down the same regulatory path as a stimulant might go for ADHD with FDA. And we actually invested in some clinical trial work to redirect some of that work to autism. Very exciting. I mean, there are even robots that are being developed now as co-therapists to help improve compliance with certain behavioral interventions rather than a child sitting at a computer screen, tapping at it, looking at a computer. Robots actually give some really interesting paths forward. The genetic therapies are already front and center in the rare disease community. I don't really need to unpack this too much. It's going to be the source of a lot of conversation throughout the meeting. But needless to say, there are different ways that you can take advantage of the genetic etiology behind your rare disease. And they're already in play. Gene therapy in Europe has already been approved. We have the really sort of fascinating, recent, somewhat controversial approval this week of a morpholino for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Exciting. This area is really exciting, but it's very nascent. It's still emerging, but very hot. Alternative therapies. I have to mention this. I have to mention this maybe because it's the pains of having worked in the autism space for many years. When you have nothing, when the research community has failed to move science forward and deliver on that end game, desperation grows. I empathize with that. And oftentimes, in that world of desperation, a lot of sort of shady science comes forward, charlatans in case, offering amazing cures, for impossible diseases. This is just a sort of note of warning to beware, be cognizant that this is happening all the time. FDA is pretty good at cracking down and offering consumer warnings on things like chelation therapies and bleach treatments that I've seen used quite frequently in the autism community. But I say this with some hesitancy, only in that some of the best ideas have come from parents anecdotally telling me something's working. And so you have to, my mantra, remain agnostic about where ideas come from, just religious about data. Evidence-based treatments. And trust me, the plural of anecdote is not data. The picture down below is actually C. diff, Clostridium difficile, which is used as fecal transplantations in treating that infection. But altering microbiomes through microbiota transplantations have become very, very popular. All right, let's talk about heterogeneity. This really, it's a big feature in every disease area I know. And I always use this sort of concept. Autism already today is failing beneath the weight of evidence. And what I mean by that is this unitary concept of a single autism doesn't exist. When you look through the lens of biomarkers and other types of objective measures, what you really see are hundreds of different autisms that share in common those core deficits that I showed earlier. And there are consequences for not understanding that heterogeneity, because in a clinical trial, if you do not understand how people are different from one another, that's what you have enrolling. So the probability of failure in your clinical trials gets quite high. Risk grows, cost, we know what that means. So the game's on for everyone, every disease area, to reduce the complexity of heterogeneity in whatever way possible. And this is a sort of very rich area for foundations to be engaged in helping with this, helping pull together cohorts, build registries, feed the research engine, looking at disease agnostically through the lens of research tools that are creating amazing amounts of data. Biology is becoming an engineering problem, a data problem, as much as it's something that's going to be solved in a Petri dish. And so today, foundations are constantly building and feeding mechanisms that are collecting data from a variety of different sources, traditional sources like imaging and blood markers and looking at the biome, but we have wearable sensors that are collecting continuous data. And even more interesting is really how social media is becoming and is likely to become a greater role in this process of creating understanding about heterogeneity. And what I mean by that is, your sharing, maybe it's in a Facebook-like context, sharing what's going on in your life offers a more granular sense of what's going on, and if a treatment's on board, whether or not treatment's working, than meeting every few weeks a clinician at a research center. So data layers that involve the collection of social information are going to be incredibly important, and it's going to put patients at the center of research in a more active state than a passive state, and I'll build on that in a moment. But this data, once you have it, into large databases, can be mined to serve all sorts of purposes undermined by heterogeneity. It can help stratify the population. You can build ontologies of disease classification through the lens of these tools. You can help improve the recruitment of individuals into clinical trials, knowing which ones should be in that trial, which shouldn't be. The promises of precision medicine are enabled through this data collection. Knowing what treatment should work for which population is what it's all about. Clinical endpoints, the newer ways of understanding how treatment is actually working to produce benefits will be within this data, knowing who responds and how, all incredibly important. And really, trust me, the large-scale mining of these big data sets will produce new targets and new risk factors. So let's talk about a few game changers before we wrap up. And as a rare disease community, you got to begin with the genome. 80% of rare diseases have genetic etiology behind them. We are in the midst of a massive genomics revolution. Your genome, everybody's genome, consists of over 3 billion letters of code. That is massive, just massive. In fact, if you printed that out, Arial 12-point font on a Word document, and stacked it, it'd be 65 stories tall, your genome. And it's incredible. Right now, what took the Human Genome Project over $3 billion, over 10 years' work, more human man-hours than it took to put someone on the moon, to sequence that first human genome, we can now do that for $1,000, just a few days' work, assuming you have the DNA. It's incredible. In fact, one of our featured studies that I spearheaded at Autism Speaks was a collaboration with Google. There was no other place to store data like this. We embarked on a project to sequence 10,000 individuals with autism, parents, siblings, the whole family. That generates petabyte scale data. Huge. I mean, the size of those 10,000 genomes would be the equivalent of watching a streaming high-definition TV on your laptop for 13 and a half years. And when we embarked on this, we knew there are only a few places in the world that can handle storing that kind of data, let alone mounting compute horsepower needed to crunch it, to exploit it, to mine it. And so missing, I encourage you to take a look at it later, is the project that we embarked. There are already 7,200 genomes into the project. One of the largest whole genome projects in the history of life sciences today. And this is all openly accessible to researchers. But there are some challenges. And this is where we as a community need to be engaged. And this is where advocates among us have an important voice. Because embarking into this future of big data comes with challenges, ethical challenges, legal challenges, certainly financial challenges. And we are already running up against constraints created by existing laws and legislation, HIPAA, et cetera. So we really need to disrupt and innovate along the areas of policy making and data sharing, data access, sharing of tools, security, privacy. All of these things are at the forefront. And the future of fully realizing the potential of this genomics revolution and all of that biomarker work I mentioned really is probably along these frameworks. And there's great work being done by the Global Alliance for Genomics in Healthcare and others who are really building the tools to disrupt this. Lots of big data initiatives in the rare disease community. I don't need to go through them. I'm going to really push through this given the amount of time we have. Last game changer. You'll hear a lot about these pluripotent stem cells. And really what this area of research really fascinating, the cliff notes of them are here. Look, we can now just take a hair follicle or a skin punch from any of you and culture cells from that then, through the magic of chemistry, can be reprogrammed into a state, a pluripotent state, meaning they can become any cell type you want. They can be differentiated into a muscle cell or a liver cell or a neuron. It's incredible where this is going. And I think obviously I'm a neuroscientist by training, it's amazing. We can actually take a skin punch from an individual, the same genome present, and make every cell that is needed to function in the brain. You're not making another brain, and autism isn't in that dish. But if you're trying to study fundamental biology, these can be very powerful, individualized ways at scale to study what is happening at a personal level. It can be very powerful in screening for new therapeutics without having to involve someone in a clinical trial. Look, it's a stretch, but it begins somewhere, and it's happening now. These same iPSCs are going to be used to help fulfill those promises, again, of precision medicine. They can be used to help make decisions about treatment. In the cancer field, researchers are already collecting circulating tumor cells and growing organoids from them and using them to make decisions about what chemotherapy to use. This is already happening in real time. And the future of this really is building repositories that represent every one of your disease stories in a dish. Very exciting work. Let's end with the power of advocacy. I cannot, one of the great pleasures of having worn the foundation hat and worked in the nonprofit world for many years, after being a drug hunter for over a decade before that, is really having the opportunity to work in Washington and work with families and other organizations to help move beyond the science. That value chain is not just going to move with money. It's not going to just move with, with who's in it. It can be moved in many other ways, and legislation has already played a key role in the rare disease story. And the Orphan Drug Act has done more to incentivize the entry of partners into that value chain than anything else. But there have been subsequent pieces of legislation that have added additional tools that help bring partners in and help facilitate the movement of work along that value chain. Again, when you look behind any of these pieces of legislation, it's the value chain you need to be thinking about. How is this helping influence the movement of science? Creating incentives and tax incentives and pediatric vouchers. These all pull companies into the value chain that weren't there. And it's happened around the world. We're not the only place doing that. I will wrap with this slide. There's more on the horizon. Probably the more interesting piece of legislation making its way through Congress right now is something you may not have even heard of. It's 21st century cures. And we worked really hard when I was at Autism Speaks with Fred Upton and his staff to help build language around this. This is going to be a massive, almost $8 billion infusion of money into HHS, mostly to NIH. It's going to be a reformation of FDA. It's really addresses so many things that have bottlenecked the value chain in many disease areas for years, and it's close. Very close. And they're already, if you look closely into the language, there are things that address rare disease built in, protecting existing incentives, et cetera. So watch out for this. Many disease communities from the rare disease world are actually actively involved in this. So I'm going to wrap there, and hopefully at this point in time you've at least got a better 10,000-foot view of how this all works. We've popped open the hood of that process of turning science into things, and you hopefully have a better idea of really how diverse that partner landscape looks like, who you're going to need to be involved in, who you are going to have to network here today, this week. A better appreciation of where the resources go, because you, as an advocate, as a foundation, can influence direct resources into that chain. And I hope I've left a few additional organizing principles to help get you thinking about what's going to mobilize the science against the actual biology behind your rare disease story. And so I'm going to leave that with that and just again share with you, I'm accessible throughout this meeting. You should feel free to contact me through LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to help any of you. My own story as a scientist has been transformed by a parent. I didn't work in autism originally. I just happened to be giving a talk at a major autism meeting, and after I came off the podium talking about my research in oxytocin, I was confronted by a parent who just told me what a world of difference it made to her to think that the drug industry might actually be interested in her story. And it's fundamentally changed my journey. Each of you has the power to change the journey of stakeholders along that value chain who haven't been activated yet, like you. And I wish you all the best with that, and I'm happy to help in any way. Thank you.